let's look at some fast movers. It's time for our review of the Space Marine Bike Squad. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're continuing in our look at the datasheets from the new Space Marine Codex. Today and tomorrow we'll be looking at some of the core fast attack units from the Space Marine Codex, the Bike Squad and the Assault Squad. Today we'll be looking at the Bike Squad, going over their rules, any synergies that we can see, and how I'd run them on the battlefield myself. Now the Space Marine Bikers must be some of the oldest models on the Space Marine range. I suspect they're not going to get updated any time soon as well until we see some Primaris Bikers. I suspect that the latter will happen at some stage, although it'd be interesting to see whether they wind up being jet bikes or regular wheeled creations. In the background, Space Marine Bike Squads are used in scouting and rapid response roles in most chapters, providing a hammer blow to the area of the battle line that most needs it. The Codex Astartes dictates that the chapter's entire 6th company should at all times be proficient in the use of bikes, and some chapters such as the White Scars take this even further, where few among them are not capable of mastering a bike should the need arise. The bikes themselves are ridiculously rugged and durable, as they well need to be, as they are carrying a massive power armoured warrior at breakneck speeds towards the enemy lines. But let's take a look at how they'll do on the tabletop. Space Marine Bikers are of course a fast attack squad for Codex Space Marines, and you buy them at 1 Sergeant and 2 Bikers. Each bike costs 23 points per model. You can include up to another 5 bikes, so a maximum of 8 bikes including the Sergeant, and on top of this you can include an attack bike, which as it has 2 riders sort of gives you a 10-man squad. That attack bike will set you back another 37 points. The bikers have an impressive movement with 14 inches, weapon skill and ballistic skill 3 up, strength 4, toughness 5, 2 wounds, 1 attack, leadership 7 and a 3 up save. As per normal, the Sergeant has an additional attack and point of leadership, and the attack bike is the same as the normal bikers, except it has 4 wounds and 2 attacks. Each biker is equipped with a bolt pistol, twin bolt gun and frag and crack grenades, and the attack bike has a heavy bolter in addition to this. In terms of options, the Sergeant can take one weapon from the Sergeant's weapons list instead of his bolt pistol, and that can be anything from a combi weapon to a storm bolter, a chainsword, or a fancy close combat weapon such as a power fist or thunderhammer. If you're taking nothing else, then I would at least swap out the bolt pistol for a chainsword and give him an extra attack rather than have the bolt pistol, which is rarely going to be used. I'd also very strongly consider upgrading to the storm bolter. It costs 2 additional points and gives you the firepower of an entire additional bike. Remember, the bikes cost 23 points, so if you can get all the firepower of another one just for 2 points, it's a pretty sensible deal. Because bikes always access bolter discipline, then you'll always be getting those 4 shots at 24-inch range, so this is about the best place you're ever going to buy a storm bolter. You do have the option for fancier combi weapons or a power fist or thunderhammer. I'd typically be trying to keep the bike squad's points cost as quite low, but if you're tailoring them up for a certain mission, then it could be worth it. 2 of the Space Marine Bikers can be armed with a special weapon instead of their bolt pistol, so you could for example take 2 Marines with melter guns and the Sergeant with a combi melter to really put some hurt on some tanks, but bear in mind that that's going to get very expensive very quickly. That loadout that I mentioned is at well over 100 points for just 3 bikers, which is not very durable at all for that amount of points investment. It is worth noting, however, that the bikers can fire their special weapon in addition to their twin bolter on the bike, so the bike squads will be putting out some very heavy firepower between the special weapon shots and their regular bolt shots. That's a nice little bonus, as usually when you buy a special weapon, say for a tactical marine, you replace the bolter. Here you get it in addition to a twin bolter, which is quite nice. Another option the entire squad has is that you can exchange the bolt pistol for a chainsword on any biker. This is absolutely worth doing in my opinion. You may or may not have seen my quick tip chainswords video, but basically you're very unlikely to be using your bolt pistol, as you need to jump through a whole host of hoops to be able to get it. First you need to have either been charged and survived a full turn, or you basically need to be in combat for multiple rounds of combat. It's pretty much always far better to be getting the extra combat attacks with chainswords than waiting around to hope to use the pistol the next turn. So I would do this for every single biker. It's absolutely free. Finally, if you choose to take an attack bike, it can swap out its heavy bolter for a multi-melter. This frankly isn't an option I'm very convinced about. Multi-melters are quite highly pointed for the amount of firepower you get out of them, being barely any less than a las cannon which has 48-inch range and strength 9. I might consider this if you are salamanders, or perhaps iron hands who ignore the moving and shooting penalty with heavy weapons, but probably not otherwise. The squad has a few special rules, including Angels of Death, which will give them shock assault, which will mean that the bites hit quite hard in close combat, provided you give all of them chainswords, which you should. Each biker will have 3 attacks on the first round of close combat, which is nothing to be sniffed at. They also have combat doctrines, which will allow them to get extra AP on all of that bolter fire when they're in the tactical doctrine, and bolter discipline, which is extra relevant on bikes because it means that they will always be able to move their 14 inches and then rapid fire their bolters up to 24 inches, so each biker will be putting out 4 bolter shots. That's very, very decent firepower, particularly if you compare it to tactical marines, who have to stay still to access the same benefit, which means that their threat range is about half of what these bikers are. Being able to move 14 inches and then fire to full effect at 24 means that they can threaten enemy infantry units even a really long way away. They have the Turbo Boost special rule, which allows you to add 6 inches to the move characteristic of the models when they advance instead of making a roll for the number of inches they get on advancing. That can really help them get from A to B very, very quickly at the expense of shooting, and it could be particularly nasty in White Scars where they can charge after that ludicrously long move. Finally, we have the Combat Squad special rule, which means that if you're fielding a squad with 6 or more models, you can divide the squad in 2 before the game starts. Typically, I'd be trying to run multiple small units of these bikes though to get extra storm bolters on the sergeants. So overall, the Space Marine bike squads are a very, very fast moving unit with pretty decent output of bolter fire, and they're not too bad in terms of close combat where they can deliver a whole bunch of strength 4 hits there too. You can also equip them with special and heavy weapons, but you will be paying through the nose in terms of points for this, compared with some of the more efficient places for delivering heavy firepower. They're more durable against damage characteristic 1 weapons compared with, say, tactical marines or scouts, but like Primaris marines will get taken out quite easily by anything that's got flat damage 2, such as, say, autocannons or Avenger Gatling cannons, for example. For their points, however, they are reasonably durable and fairly in line with a lot of Primaris marines who have a similar profile. Now we've talked about the unit, let's have a look at a few ways in which we can buff them up to get the most out of them. We'll start with chapter traits, and of course White Scars are going to be one of the most interesting choices here. Their lightning assault will mean that they can charge even when they advanced, allowing for some interesting first turn charge possibilities. The second part of their tactic also helps the attack bike, meaning that it won't suffer the -1 to hit penalty when it moves and fires heavy weapons, so if you take one of those along, then that could be helpful too. White Scars also have a large number of stratagems that synergize well with bikers, such as being able to advance and shoot, or fall back, shoot and charge, which is particularly powerful on a bike squad, because you want to be using all of that rapid fire goodness as well as their close combat potential. The White Scars bikers can hurtle towards you at absolute breakneck speed, and then be a complete nuisance, tying up ranged units that you thought were safe from charges, and then falling back and engaging something else new. Other useful chapters include Ultramarines, again for being able to fall back and shoot. Iron Hands are also good, as their 6+ Feel No Pain really helps protect a 2-wound unit against flat damage 2 weapons, such as those overcharged plasma and autocannons. Extra Overwatch never hurts, and their boosted doctrine will really help out the attack bike, ignoring the penalty to move and getting you reroll 1s to hit with heavy weapons. Raven Guard getting a 2-up save via being in cover when they're far away is great on bikes and helps out the durability on a potentially fairly fragile unit, and also possess a nice stratagem to fall back, shoot and charge again, which never hurts. Salamanders could be particularly powerful if you're thinking of bringing something like a multi-melter attack bike or special weapons, particularly melter guns. Their Master Artisans rule will let you re-roll those extra shots, and their boosted doctrine can help with the wound rolls of any melters or flamers you pack onto the unit. Finally, Imperial and Crimson Fists are absolutely excellent with bike squads, as they have very high output flexible bolter weapons. Getting a flat 25% increase out of the number of damage you get is amazing, as is Ignore's cover, and say a 3-man bike squad with a sergeant with a storm bolter is almost the perfect unit to get the +1 to hit out of the Crimson Fists doctrine, It's got a low number of models and a high number of bolter shots, so these will be clearing hordes like no tomorrow. Of course, Dark Angels have a lot of interesting biker things, but we'll be doing the Raven Wing at another time, I'm afraid. In terms of character support, obviously captains, lieutenants, chapter masters and chaplains will all be decent at buffing the damage output of the unit, though bear in mind that your bike squad might be better off going off on its own to hunt down enemy infantry and score objectives. They could, however, be a good accompaniment to an advancing fighty captain or chapter master on a bike, or perhaps one with a jump pack, and screen him even while he buffs them with reroll ones. There aren't too many stratagems out of the main book that can boost the bikers, but one of them is skilled riders for 2 command points. You can select an Adeptus Astartes biker or landspeeder unit. If it moves that phase, then it will have a 4+ invul save against ranged weapons until the start of your next movement phase, and if it advances, then it will have a 3+ invul save against ranged weapons, which is very nice. If you are really going on a bike heavy strategy, then this could be worth it, though I do feel if you are going to use it, you're going to have to get a very big unit of bikes to make it efficient. Nobody's really going to care too much if you put a 4+ invul save on a 3-man unit of bikes, for example. They'll probably either die anyway or just get ignored. In terms of other stratagems, there are an absolute ton in the White Scars book that can benefit these guys. I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but you can always look at the stratagem section of my review of that codex if you want to hear a little bit more. So how would I field bike squads on the tabletop? I personally enjoy fielding 3-man bike squads, where every sergeant has a storm bolter. This is a very cheap little unit at 71 points, but puts out a very heavy amount of firepower for that cost. It has a movement of 14 and then 16 bolter shots at 24 inches, and there aren't too many units that have that much firepower at that faster speed for that little cost. I'd also be taking the chainswords on the 2 regular bikers, meaning that if they do need to engage in close combat, they'll have 9 attacks on the charge thanks to shock assault, which could be enough to clear the last infantryman or 2 off an objective if they need to contest one. Being such a cheap little fast attack slot can also be pretty useful if you're trying to look to fill a brigade and gain all of the command point bonuses from doing that. The fact that they're so cheap as well means that you might not be so adverse to throwing them onto a far-flung objective, while your more expensive, more heavy-hitting units focus on actually killing the enemy and winning the battle. I could see the potential argument in including an attack bike as part of the unit, perhaps just a 37-point base attack bike to actually act as a source of protection for the other bikers. If they get hit by damage 1 weapons, then the attack bike is actually more durable point for point compared with the normal bikers, so it could keep the regular bikers, and more importantly the sergeant, alive for a bit longer. Plus having an extra heavy bolter on the field doesn't hurt too much either. As it stands, I'm not the biggest fan of the special weapon options in the bike squads. I feel that they just cost a little bit too much for what they do, and the bike squad's already fairly fragile as it is, so adding more points to an already fragile unit is a little bit counterintuitive in my mind. If I was fielding bigger bike squads, say if I was going in on a very big bike strategy from White Scars or something, I would probably just fill out the unit with a lot more regular bikers and maybe throw in a heavy bolter attack bike too. Blitz them up the board turn 1, maybe think about doing some gamey early charges, perhaps even think about a Thunderhammer or Power Fist on the Sergeant in that case, though I wouldn't like having to give up that Storm Bolter. In terms of how I'd field them in an actual game, I'd generally deploy my small bike squads, hidden from line of sight if possible turn 1, because with that massive movement range they should be able to move in to get their shots off on my first turn. If they are going to be visible for whatever reason and I'm going second, I'd strongly think about using prepared positions on them, as they can't gain cover saves quite as easily as infantry due to not having the infantry keyword. I would typically use the bikers to chip in firepower against anything within range, primarily focusing on bullying any light infantry squads. I'd not be averse to charging them in to contest an objective or hit some more light infantry to death, but you would have to weigh that up against the possibility of accessing their bolter firepower in the next turn if they got tied up and swamped. With that big movement, they could certainly provide a bit of harassment to the enemy's forces, and if the enemy doesn't target them, then there'd certainly be opportunities for doing gamey charges to tie up enemy heavy hitters and lock them down to prevent them from shooting. Overall, I think that the bike squad is actually now a decently competitive Space Marine unit, particularly when fielded in the 3-man with a Stormbolter configuration that I like. It does suffer from being a little fragile, but the massive movement and decent firepower can kind of make up for that. One thing that you would have to consider if you're bringing bikers will be whether or not to take scout bikers instead, which are another very decently strong unit. They sacrifice a bit of durability to gain a bit more hitting power with their shotguns, but of course this will require you to be closer in range, so they fill a slightly different niche to the regular bike squad, which don't mind being strung out at 24 inches and harassing the enemy from a distance. Inceptors could also be another potential competitor, if you're looking for a little bit more high strength and AP on their weapons to allow them to harass enemy vehicles as well as infantry. I'm glad that the bike squad is looking a little bit more usable in the new Space Marine book. Shock Assault, Combat Doctrines and Bolter Discipline have helped this unit to no end, and have raised it out of being a fairly bad unit at the start of 8th to being something decently worth considering now. As always, thank you for listening, and I'll be back with Assault Marines tomorrow. Feel free to subscribe if you'd like to see more Auspex Tactics videos like this, and contribute to my Patreon to help make more of these videos like this possible in the future. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you guys in the next video.